The sound came from behind a locked steel door. On November 3, 2016, sheriff's deputies were searching an isolated property near Woodruff, South Carolina. They were looking for a couple who had been missing for 2 months. Instead, they heard a woman calling from inside a shipping container secured with 5 locks. It took investigators nearly 10 minutes to cut through them. When the door finally opened, they found 30-year-old Kala Brown alive in the darkness. She had been held there for more than 2 months. Within moments, she told deputies that her boyfriend had been killed and that other bodies might be buried on the land. The missing persons search had just become the investigation of a serial killer. Kala Brown and 32-year-old Charles Carver disappeared near the end of August 2016. To the people who knew them, the silence felt wrong immediately. Calls went unanswered. Plans were abandoned. Neither of them returned to the ordinary routines that had defined their lives. Then messages began appearing online. Posts on Charles's Facebook account suggested that the couple was fine. They appeared to say that Kala and Charles had married, bought a home, and decided to leave their old lives behind. To a stranger, the explanation might have sounded possible. To friends and relatives, it did not sound like Charles. The messages created the illusion of movement while the couple remained missing. They also consumed precious time. Were Kala and Charles hiding voluntarily? Had they left after a private disagreement? Or was someone using their accounts to make investigators look in the wrong direction? The person posting appeared to understand how easily social media could become a substitute for proof. A profile was active, so some observers assumed its owner must be safe. But a message does not reveal who is holding the phone or typing at the keyboard. Friends noticed that the tone, timing, and explanations did not match the people they knew. Their refusal to accept the convenient story helped keep the disappearance visible. Investigators had to separate rumor from behavior. They examined who had spoken with the couple, where their phones had last communicated with towers, and which people had recently offered them work. Each record was limited on its own. Together, the records began to point away from a voluntary departure and toward a specific piece of land. One name eventually emerged from the digital trail: Todd Kohlhepp. Kohlhepp was a successful real estate broker in the Spartanburg area. He owned businesses, sold property, and presented himself as confident and financially comfortable. He also owned a large, fenced rural property outside Woodruff. Kala knew him because she had previously done cleaning work connected with his real estate business. Behind that respectable public identity was a history that should have raised serious questions. As a teenager in Arizona, Kohlhepp had been convicted in a kidnapping and sexual assault case. He spent years in prison before rebuilding his life in South Carolina. By 2016, many people who met him knew only the businessman. Kala and Charles went to his rural property after discussing work. What should have been an ordinary job became an ambush. According to Kala's later account, Kohlhepp killed Charles shortly after they arrived. The violence was sudden. Kala was threatened and taken into a metal storage container on the property. The door closed, and daylight disappeared. The container was approximately 30 feet long. Inside were shelves, stored food, water, and other supplies. It was not an improvised hiding place created in panic. Someone had prepared the space. Once the locks were secured from outside, the ordinary steel box became nearly invisible on a property filled with equipment and outbuildings. That invisibility was part of what made the location so dangerous. A shipping container does not attract attention in a rural work area. It can store tools, machinery, or building materials. Neighbors had no reason to imagine that a missing person was behind its walls. Passing aircraft could not see inside. A driver on the nearest road would notice nothing unusual. The container also changed sound. A shout that would carry across an open field became a dull vibration behind steel. Kala could not know whether anyone was close enough to hear her, and calling out at the wrong time could bring Kohlhepp back to the door. Kala was restrained and kept in the rear of the container. The conditions were dark, confined, and deliberately isolating. Kohlhepp controlled when the door opened, what information reached her, and whether she had any contact with the outside world. This documentary will not describe the abuse in graphic detail. What matters is that Kala endured repeated violence and uncertainty while trying to stay alive. She could not overpower him or escape through the locked door. Her survival depended on understanding the person who controlled it. Kala later said she realized that she needed to convince him that keeping her alive served his interests. She watched his behavior, controlled her reactions, and adapted to whatever might reduce the immediate danger. It was not cooperation. It was strategy under coercion. Days became weeks. Kala had no reliable way to know what investigators were doing or whether anyone had found the connection to Kohlhepp. Outside the container, someone continued posting messages that made it appear she and Charles had chosen to disappear. Maintaining a sense of time became another challenge. Light did not move normally through the sealed space. Meals, visits, and distant sounds became the only markers between one day and the next. The longer the captivity continued, the easier it would have been to believe that the search had ended. Kala instead focused on surviving the next encounter and preserving the possibility that someone was still looking. Inside, she listened. Every vehicle approaching the property could be Kohlhepp returning. Every distant engine could also be someone searching. The same sound could represent danger or rescue, and she had no way to know which until the locks moved. Meanwhile, friends kept pressing for answers. The online story did not explain abandoned belongings, missed responsibilities, or the couple's complete absence from people they cared about. Investigators obtained access to digital records and began reconstructing the final known movements of Kala's and Charles's phones. A message in Kala's account referenced Kohlhepp. Cell phone information also placed part of the couple's final activity near land he owned. The clues did not prove what had happened, but they gave detectives a location they could search. That location covered roughly 100 acres. For detectives, obtaining the warrant was only the beginning. A property of that size could not be cleared by glancing through one house. There were fields, wooded areas, structures, vehicles, and storage spaces. If the digital trail was wrong, the search might reveal nothing. If it was right, every minute mattered. On the morning of November 3rd, deputies arrived with a warrant. The property was rural, fenced, and large enough to hide vehicles, buildings, and disturbed ground from anyone passing on the road. Investigators spread out and began checking structures. Then someone heard a sound from the container. At first it was difficult to identify. The steel walls distorted the voice. Deputies moved closer and called out. From behind the locked door, a woman answered. The search immediately changed from evidence collection to rescue. The container was secured by 5 locks. Officers brought cutting tools and worked through the metal while others stood ready nearby. Body camera footage captured the urgency, the noise of the tools, short instructions between deputies, and the knowledge that someone was alive on the other side. Kala could hear them too. After more than 2 months of isolation, the sounds outside were finally different. These voices identified themselves. They told her they were going to get her out. The last lock gave way. Deputies opened the heavy door and entered cautiously. Their flashlights moved through the dark interior until they reached Kala at the back. She was alive. The rescue itself lasted only minutes, but what Kala said next changed cases that had remained unsolved for years. She told officers that Kohlhepp had killed Charles. She also warned that there were other victims on the property. Even in the first minutes after the door opened, she was giving investigators a map of the danger around them. The officers had arrived expecting to search for evidence connected to 2 missing adults. They now had a living witness, an alleged murder scene, and information suggesting more burial sites. The entire property had to be treated differently. Deputies rushed her to medical care while investigators secured the land. At the same time, another team went to Kohlhepp's home. He initially spoke with officers calmly. Then the calls from the rural property began arriving. Detectives told him that they had found Kala alive inside his container. The successful broker's public identity collapsed in a single sentence. Kohlhepp was arrested. Search teams, forensic specialists, and cadaver dogs began working across the property. Investigators located Charles Carver's remains. They also discovered the remains of Johnny and Megan Coxey, another couple who had disappeared after being offered work. The investigation expanded beyond the land. 13 years earlier, 4 people had been killed at Superbike Motorsports in Chesney, South Carolina. The victims were Scott Ponder, Beverly Guy, Brian Lucas, and Chris Sherbert. The 2003 attack had become one of the region's most notorious unsolved cases. Investigators had followed leads, released information, and appealed to the public, but no arrest had been made. After Kala's rescue, Kohlhepp admitted responsibility for those 4 killings. The confession shocked investigators because the motorcycle shop case had appeared disconnected from the disappearances on the rural property. It involved a commercial building, 4 victims, and a crime committed in 2003. Yet the person behind it had remained in the same region, built a business, and continued interacting with the public for years. Without Kala's rescue, those cases might have remained separate indefinitely: a missing couple from 2016, another missing couple from 2015, and 4 unsolved killings from 2003. Her information gave detectives the link that no database had been able to produce. One voice from inside a container had unlocked a case that had remained cold for more than a decade. The scale of the investigation now became clear. Kohlhepp was connected to 7 murders: Charles Carver, Johnny and Megan Coxey, and the 4 victims at the motorcycle shop. The businessman who had sold homes and negotiated contracts had concealed a violent history behind property, money, and an appearance of success. There were also difficult questions about the systems around him. His earlier conviction was known in official records. Yet he had managed to obtain a real estate license and build a career that gave him access to properties, clients, and people looking for work. The case demonstrated how a respectable title can make warning signs easier to overlook. It also showed why missing person investigations cannot depend on social media activity alone. The messages posted after Kala and Charles vanished created a false version of their lives. Digital evidence eventually helped locate them, but only because investigators compared online claims with phone data, relationships, and behavior in the real world. On May 26, 2017, Todd Kohlhepp pleaded guilty to 7 counts of murder, 2 counts of kidnapping, first-degree criminal sexual conduct, and weapons charges. The agreement removed the possibility of a death sentence. He received 7 consecutive life sentences, followed by 60 additional years, with no possibility of parole. The sentence confirmed his responsibility, but it could not restore what the victims' families had lost. Charles, Johnny, Megan, Scott, Beverly, Brian, and Chris were people before they became names connected to one offender. Their lives should not be reduced to the way they ended. The guilty plea also prevented years of separate trials and appeals, but it meant the public would never hear every piece of evidence presented in court. Some questions about Kohlhepp's decisions, preparation, and possible actions outside the known cases remained. The official result was clear: 7 murders, 2 kidnappings, and a sentence designed to ensure he would never leave prison. Kala survived, but survival was not the conclusion of a simple rescue story. She carried the trauma of confinement, the loss of Charles, and the public attention that followed. Her testimony and information helped investigators locate victims, solve the Superbike case, and prevent Kohlhepp from harming anyone else. The strongest image from this case is the steel container. From the outside, it looked like an ordinary object on a large rural property. It had no windows, no sign, and nothing that revealed the person trapped inside. For 2 months, it hid a crime in plain sight. But steel could not completely erase a human voice. When deputies arrived, Kala understood that the sounds outside had changed. She called back. Investigators stopped, listened, and refused to walk past the locked door. That sequence matters. A phone record led to a property. A careful search led to a sound. The sound led to a rescue. The rescue led to graves, a confession, and the solution to a 13-year-old cold case. The story began with two people disappearing and false messages claiming they were safe. It ended when the woman those messages tried to erase was finally heard. For 65 days, Kala Brown remained hidden behind steel and 5 locks. On the 66th day, the door opened. And the truth came out with her.